When the first Fantastic Beasts movie came out, I was completely smitten with Newt's Bowtruckle friend, so toss me a thumbs up if you were too. My heart just went out to this shy little leafy buddy who kept himself tucked inside Newt's jacket rather than being with his own kind in a tree. I designed my own rounder plush version in my style, and today I'm going to show you how I made it. First of all, if you're new here, welcome. To keep up with me and see what I make next, click the subscribe button below and hit the notification bell if you want to make sure you don't miss anything. Especially if you're a Harry Potter fan, because Harry Potter crafts are my favorite. Take a peek into the video description below to see a list of everything you'll need to make this guy, including a free downloadable pattern. And stick around all the way to the end because I also made a Niffler plushie, which is pretty cute. Here's how to make your very own Bowtruckle plushie. Once you've downloaded and printed out the free pattern PDF from the video description, cut out all of the pieces. You don't have to keep the little legs together like this, but I did. Those are all ready to go, so let's start out by cutting out the heart shape on some light green fleece. I just hold the templates in place and cut around them. Next, cut out 2 little circles for eyes on some black felt. Then place the same circle template onto the light green fleece and use that as a guide to cut a slightly larger circle. Then, cut that circle in half to make 2 little eyelids. To make the main plushie and the legs, take some green fleece and make sure it's folded in half with the wrong sides out. Mark where you want to put a nice big gap on the body shape template. Mine's on the side right here. Then give your fleece a tug to see which direction has more stretch. Make sure that the arrows on the pattern are pointing in the same direction as that stretch, then flip the pattern over and place it down on the fabric. I put the legs over next to it, then traced around each shape using a green marker. Remember to leave that gap you marked open, then cut around the general shapes, leaving plenty of room to sew. I kept mine all on the same piece, but you don't have to. We'll be sewing the legs first, just on the lines, leaving the top open. I stuck a few pins on there to keep them from sliding around at the last second, and here we go! If you're using a sewing machine, start and end your lines by going forwards and backwards a few stitches to keep them from unraveling later. But if you'd rather sew this by hand, that's okay too. I'll link to a tutorial for backstitch in the video description below if you want to learn how. There's one leg done. Do the other the same way, and once you've sewn around both, you can cut that piece off. Cut pretty closely around each leg shape, being careful not to clip the seam and leaving some extra fabric at the open end. Then, carefully turn each one right side out. To do this, I use a tool called a pair of hemostats, also known as surgical forceps, so grab the far end and pull it out. I'll link to where you can get them in the video description below. Then I push a stick in there to make sure the end is turned completely. Now that we have 2 finished legs, we have to attach them to the body. They're going to go right here at the bottom with some overlap at the top so they'll get stuck in the seam. But to get them there, they need to be upside down and inside the plush. So keep that placement in mind, then lift up the top flap and stick the legs between the 2 pieces of fabric. Make sure the open ends will get caught in the seam and that there is room to sew on the lines on either side without getting the sides of them caught. I pin them down to the fabric so they won't move as much, then continue pinning on the inside of the whole shape. Then we can sew it together. Start at one end of the gap we marked and sew right on the line all the way around, stopping at the other end of the gap so that will be left open. Remember to sew forwards and backwards a few stitches when you start and finish, and be extra careful while sewing through the legs at the bottom. This is the trickiest part for me because sometimes my sewing machine has trouble with all of the extra layers of fleece. Whenever you reach a corner, stop the machine and turn the piece before you continue. There are lots of turns and small sections at the top where the leaves are, so take your time, work your way around, and do a few backwards stitches at the very end. Pull out the pins, then trim around the seams, being careful not to get too close to them. Leave some extra fabric around the gap, and you can also clip little V-shapes into all of the curves and corners so it'll keep its shape when you turn it right side out, which is the next step. I started by pulling out the bottom section with the legs, which should be attached. Then I used the hemostats to grab the end of each leaf and very carefully pull it through to the outside. Once it's mostly flipped, you can push a stick into the points to get the shape right, and yay, look how cute and floppy! For some extra detail, I decided to sew a line through the center of each leaf. I think it makes them look a lot more like leaves. Just be super careful if you're using a sewing machine to do it, since those pieces are pretty small. Trim off any extra threads once those are done, and now we can start stuffing. Push small handfuls of fiberfill up into the head and continue to fill it up until you're happy with the way it looks. Then pinch the gap shut and pin it so we can stitch it closed. For that part, we'll be using ladder stitch, and I'll link to a tutorial for that in the video description in case you're unfamiliar with it. Thread a needle with some green thread and tie a big knot onto the end of it. To start it, reach the needle down into the gap and push it up and out through one side of the gap like this, so when you tug it, the knot catches on the inside. Flip the whole piece over, then draw a line straight across the gap. Push the needle down and over along that fold, then back up just next to where the thread is going in. Then go back across to the other side of the gap and repeat that same motion. Up the side, across the gap. Up the other side, back across the gap until you reach the other end. To tie a knot and secure your stitches, grab one of the machine stitches at the end of the gap with your needle and then put your needle through the loop that forms in your thread, so when you finish pulling, it ties a little knot. Make one more knot in the same place, then to hide your excess thread, push the needle down into the plush right where your knot is and push it back out a ways over. That way, when you tug on the thread and trim it off, the rest of the thread gets lost inside the plush. Now he needs a cute little face, so grab the remaining pieces. Decide where you want to place the eyes on the heart-shaped face. Start by tying a knot at the end of a piece of black thread and push your needle up from the back so the knot stays on the back side where it'll be hidden. Then sew the eyepieces on by hand using whip stitch. Even if you're new to sewing, don't worry, you can totally do this, and I linked to my more detailed tutorial for that stitch as well so you can learn it. Once both eyes are sewn on, flip the piece over. To tie a knot, grab one of the stitches on the back with the needle, then put your needle through the loop like we did before. One more for good luck, then you can trim the excess thread. To add highlights to the eyes, we'll use some white embroidery floss or pearl cotton to embroider a French knot onto the upper inside corner of each eye. To do that, tie a knot at the end and push the needle up from the back in the exact spot where you want the first French knot to go. Place it down on the table to free up both of your hands. Wrap the thread around the needle one time pretty close to the fabric, then without letting it unwrap, push the needle back down into the fabric right next to where it's coming out. That way, when you very slowly pull the thread through, it should form a tiny little knot up against the felt eye. These can be pretty tricky at first, so feel free to practice a few on a scrap piece of fabric. Repeat that process for the other eye, then flip the piece over so you can tie a knot on the back just like we did before. Now we can add the eyelids. Thread some light green thread onto a needle and tie a knot at the end of it. Then pick up one of those tiny green semicircles we cut out earlier and place it off the side of one eye like this. How you place it kind of determines the emotion on his face, so do what you think looks best. Whip stitch it on along the outer curved edge, leaving the side by the eye open, and that's what the first one looks like. Place the other one on the opposite side to match and use that same thread to sew on that one in the same way. Flip it over and tie it off the way we've been doing the others by tying a knot to one of the stitches on the back and trim your thread. He just needs a mouth. I'll be embroidering mine on using this thinner pearl cotton in black with a knot tied at the end. I started by stitching one little line in the center, then added more lines to one side of it until I liked the width. I curved it up at the end, then I moved over to the other side and tried to copy that exactly over there. This is kind of like a back stitch in a funky order, so you can check the list of sewing tutorials for each stitch that I used in the video description below if you want a slower paced lesson on that. You also don't have to make the mouth exactly the way I did. Feel free to give it its own little personality. Tie it off on the back the same way we did earlier. Look how cute! I can't deal. We just have to sew the face to the rest of the plushie and we'll be done. Pick a spot for the face and pin it in place, then get another length of light green thread onto a needle with a knot at the end. To start sewing the face on, push your needle up under the point at the bottom of the heart so the knot will get stuck between the plush and the face piece. Then you can start whip stitching around the edge to attach the face to the head. Whip stitch is probably my favorite hand-sewn stitch. I use it the most often. You basically just keep swooping your needle down off the side of the applique and do this diagonal motion so the needle comes back up on the edge of the face piece in the next spot over. Of course, you could use all kinds of different stitches if you like the look of something else or if you aren't as familiar with this one. It's totally up to you. When you reach the spot where you started, tie a little knot right onto the first stitch we made by grabbing it with the needle, then pulling the needle through the loop in the thread. Then push the needle down into the plush right where the knot is and out over here to lose our thread on the inside like we did earlier. One last quick snip, pull out the pins, and that is our finished Bowtruckle plushie. I am pretty obsessed with these. I think they're one of the cutest things I've ever managed to make, and I am so happy to be able to share them with you. Also, like I said earlier, they turn out really great if you vary the facial expressions with your embroidery. I made this little smiley one too. And now he has a friend. I might go make some more now. I'm not gonna lie, I made one of these for myself and he's sitting on my nightstand. If you make your own Bowtruckle plush, definitely post a photo of it on social media. I'd also really love to see it, so don't forget to tag me. I'm at LaurenFairWX on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Because I couldn't leave out the niffler, I made one of those too. And he has a little pocket for hiding shiny things. To learn how to make this niffler plushie, click the card above or check in the video description below for a link. I had so much fun making these fantastic beasts and I hope you enjoyed learning how to make them. If there are any more magical creatures you'd like to see me make into a plushie, leave your requests in the comments below. Thanks so much for watching and I'll see you soon.